Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We have a new interview by Alex Karp. This is his 5th interview in the past 4 weeks. Either Q3 earnings are going to be phenomenal or they've got something up their sleeve because I don't know. I don't know if you go that public before an earnings report so many times, issued a shareholder letter, did many different interviews, gone overseas to talk at a bunch of different places. It's pretty cool. It's like they're trying to be out there. They're trying to get the name out there. They're trying to make him more of a personality, which is great for us because it's more stuff to analyze, more stuff to understand our investment. But it's also a different type of Karp. It's a very confident Karp about what has been going on in the U.S. with their CAGR, their growth over the past couple of years, and I like to see it. So we're going to analyze a couple of clips. He just spoke for about 25 minutes at the Warsaw Security Forum. I have a couple of 5-minute clips or a couple of 1-minute clips, 5 1-minute clips that I'm going to react to. These are on my Palantir Daily Twitter account, so if you're not following that, you definitely should. And let's see some of the stuff he has to say, and we'll analyze them in some small sound bites.
But let me give you a slightly different riff on this. There's a famous quote from Wittgenstein, which is, Ein Regel folge zu glauben ist kein Regel zu folgen, which is to say you're following a rule. I believe the most important thing Palantir is actually doing is not whether we should be used to deport undocumented people in America, most of which were in the context of where we were doing it involved in felonious behavior. I think that ends actually is more politicization than a real issue. I do think there are real issues around profiling and when do you use this software in a local jurisdictional context. We've walked away from building databases against Muslims and many other things. And there's some very, very legitimate issues that are concerning that are hard to answer in courts in a short form. What does it mean in the West currently to use software? It means to defend your ideas. Why do I want to be here? Why are you here? Because the idea of sovereignty of a nation comes down to software heroism and an ability which leads to the ability to push back on a larger, more powerful power.
So this is a clip we'll get into a little bit more as he continues to talk, but this was a really interesting thing, right? Because his whole thesis here is like the basis for your sovereignty, which is a fancy word for protecting your own right to be a nation, right? Your own agency, is your ability to protect the actual country, right? No one's going to mess with the United States because they know if they mess with us, we're going to nuke them. Other smaller countries that don't have the military or economic capabilities that like the United States, Russia, or China has, what stops them from being invaded? What stops them from their sovereignty being eroded? Is it just nice people? Well, we learned Putin's not nice, and we've kind of always known Putin's not nice. It is software, and I think so. Karp is speaking on what he talked about to Stanley Druckenmiller, which is like this really unique, broad vision that he has about how he can empower companies or countries and what their software can do to be able to make sure those countries don't have to be destroyed if a bigger country comes up against them. Here's Karp talking about on suing the government.
So when you say disruptive stuff, what do you mean exactly?
Well,
Give me an example.
The most important thing, in my humble opinion, having been at this for almost 2 decades, everyone in this room can do is make sure your procurement process is actually a procurement process. It's not, we buy the software from my buddy, my friend, my cousin, or my local provider who may be more likable.
As the Russians do, I imagine.
But it's not just, look, Palantir, we fought the U.S. government for nearly a decade, including going to court. Most important people in the world came into my office, which was modest at the time, and said, quite literally, some people will conclude that you're an asshole if you sue the U.S. government. By the way, we sued the U.S. government not to buy Palantir, but to have a procurement process where they acquire software, not a large tender from lobbyists. This is one of the most important things we ever did as a company because wasn't set up to help us. It was set up to make sure that software is not just a spend item, essentially welfare to local industry.
That's a good point. I mean, a lot of people think when Palantir sued the government, it was to get them more deals. And it probably was because they knew the byproduct of getting more deals would be the United States has a real procurement process. But the larger issue here was that you can't just buy software to buy software because you're buddy with a bunch of people. It's rather, if you're going to buy software, you've got to buy software that actually makes sense, that actually does something. And if you're not going to buy software, and we're the ones that do something, and we should be getting these deals because we're doing something. And it's important to reward the people that are doing something in a meritocracy. All right, here's Karp speaking on data protection.
In war, your ability to use, what does it mean to use software? How do you control your special operators? Where do they go? Where do they leave? Do they get the SIGINT information while they're on the battlefield or while they're not on the battlefield? Do you get information from space? Does that information from space provided to the people doing the actual operation? Can you disrupt the information flow of the adversary? Can you map their information flow? Can you do, it's one of the really interesting things is people assume people like in this room and civil libertarians are misaligned. Actually, very much aligned, because if you're working in complicated environments, only very few people can actually know the battle plan. That's called data protection. And that data protection has to be done in the most granular way, a way that can be made transparent internally but not externally. These things are information technologies, and the West has an enormous advantage over the East. Why? Because if you're going to build a company, you're not going to build it in a country where the company will be taken over by the government the minute it's successful.
That is another really good point. We saw this happen with Alibaba and Jack Ma. You want to build a tech company, which is why America has the best tech companies, in a world in which it's not going to be taken away. And in order to do that, you need to protect data, because if you don't protect data, then your company's probably going to be taken away, or your company's not going to be seen in the most positive way. And we're seeing this happen with Meta right now. So, I mean, if you're going to build a tech company or a tech platform, you want to build it in a way that other countries don't have or that your own country doesn't have the ability to destroy you simply because you talked about a tech company. We'll do one more. Palantir CEO speaking about their work with Immigration Customs Enforcement.
So Palantir was at the center of some huge controversy a couple of years ago regarding some of the work with ICE. And obviously, being a company that works in intelligence, there were some questions as to whether Palantir pushes the boundaries of the values that underscore democratic societies and human rights protection. What has Palantir done to address that? And can you give us some insight into how these companies are changing and adapting to really embody the values-based way in which we run societies and taking that in?
So Palantir, some of this, by the way, is inside baseball for America. I don't think anyone in Europe in any way would support the immigration policy that we have in America. I'm pro-immigration, but in reality of what we did with our product and what we continue to do with our product is it's used to deport people in America who are undocumented. This is largely not controversial outside of America. The ethical questions involving Palantir largely, in my view, come down to what does it mean to work with software in a civil society? That comes down to who sees the data, under what conditions, can you conform with GDPR or ethical strictures, legal normative components in America and globally. What's interesting about Palantir is there's only one platform I know of the world that actually conforms to these, and that's Palantir, which is why so much of Europe is powered by Palantir. And unfortunately in America, some of the critiques are just politicization. Like I'm very in favor of only buying software that conforms to the strictest norms, both because it's good for society and it's great for Palantir.
So there, Karp is saying, and I did a longer video on ICE if anyone ever wants to see it on my channel, but there, what Karp is saying there is basically like, our software in the context of GDPR and regulations is the best software, and it's the most strictest software, which is why we power so much of Europe, because Europe is very, very headfast on making sure you're compliant with GDPR. So a lot of the political stuff about, like Palantir works with ICE and they're evil, it's like most of the stuff they do is working with felonious criminals, and because they are apolitical and they want to simply help the West, they will get blamed for certain things that other countries don't want to be able to do. For example, they just picked up the $229 million contract that Google didn't want to take because of things like drone strikes. Well, at the end of the day, if the West needs to protect itself, right, and this is sort of going into the philosophical argument behind why Palantir software is used in the West and used to protect freedoms and democracy, then Palantir is not going to shy away from that. And so a lot of that stuff ultimately is political, but the GDPR regulation stuff, protecting consumer privacy and data, the stuff that Google, Facebook, and Amazon really don't comply with, that stuff that actually is the exact opposite of that. Palantir is the antithesis to that. And they actually do protect that in a lot of meaningful ways. So overall, I thought this was a good interview. I'll leave a link in the description for you guys to listen to the rest of it. I liked it. I think Karp was speaking in a lot of different ways. He's speaking with a level of confidence over the past 5 weeks that makes me feel either they've got something up their sleeve for Q3. I mean, it's just hard to see them missing earnings on Q3 or not doing that well with him being so publicly out there speaking about Palantir. But I don't know. I guess we're going to see what happens. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. Let me know your thoughts on this latest interview, and I'll see you in the next one.